And welcome to this week's Quantum Alignment Show. I feel really happy to be here today, considering it's definitely been a week of adventures in the tech department. So I'm really looking forward to sharing with you the information that I want to share with you today, because this is information I don't share very often, and it's something I've sat with for a while, and it came up in a couple of times, but it came up really strongly one day in our Understanding Human Design online membership group. One of our members was asking if I could see where in her chart she might have ADD, because she felt very traumatized by having been diagnosed at a young age with ADD, because she really felt like she didn't have ADD, but everybody in her family had labeled her that way, and she had grown up with that label. And she wanted to explore from a different point of view, maybe reframing some of the things that might be in her chart that could help her understand the potential of maybe the ADD in her chart wasn't really the medical diagnosis, but something else. I used to teach this information when I did family coaching. I used to actually have a practice where I coached parents of children who were diagnosed with ADD who wanted to homeschool. That was my very teeny tiny, very narrow niche. Wasn't that a narrow niche back then, Cindy?
Yes, it is.
So today I want to explore not just ADD, but really revisit the conversation around learning and learning styles, especially in light of where we are this year with, the way that school is kind of different than this year compared to how it used to be. And I know that many of us, me included, are struggling with finding effective ways to educate our children from home, support our children in learning in a process that doesn't work for a lot of kids. And I just saw, maybe some of you saw this sort of really heartbreaking picture of this 5-year-old in front of a computer, kind of wiping his eyes with his shirt because he was crying, because he was feeling frustrated. And I was just thinking about how so many kids are really trying to just cope with not only the social issues of distance learning and being away from their peers, but also just the learning challenges that is presented, really not just for our kids, but for a lot of us, being in front of Zoom all day long, as you are right now. So I'm going to start. We have some slides. I think Cindy Cindy, I'll just let you do your thing with the slides. She's just posted slide hands out here on Zoom, and we'll make sure that if you're watching on Facebook that you'll also get access to the slides. And let's get rolling today. All right. We're going to do something a little bit different today, because there were so many possible slides I could have created, because there's so many things in the chart that we want to talk about, that I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit. So I am going to ask you to take good notes. If this is something that you really want to look at your chart in the context of it, I'll try to go slowly so that you'll get a chance to kind of really identify where things are in your chart. And I'll try to go back and forth, or at least show you on a blank chart where some of the major factors that I'm going to be discussing are today. So we're going to talk about how we learn, and of course, busting some of the myths of ADD. And so I want to start first by introducing us to the 3 ways of learning. And as I'm introducing this to you guys, I want you to realize that a school system is a system. And because it's a system, and because it's a system that I believe, this is my personal belief, that is a system that's overtaxed, that has so many students in it, and doesn't really quite have the funding necessary to effectively meet the needs of the students, is a system that maybe in a lot of ways is devalued or not valued enough in our community. And because it's a system and it has so many people that it has to move through, things that are complex and entangled and maybe have more depth than we can give it in a system have been distilled down to very, very simple, basic understandings. So some of you who maybe have been familiar with changes in the education system over the last 20, 30 years, maybe 40 years, probably 20, 30 years, have been familiar with the idea of teaching to learning styles, right? And part of that teaching to learning styles information comes from looking at the different way different brains are hardwired to learning. And I'm really wanting you to understand that basic distillation, and some of you may see some of the graphics related to that. I'll show you a graphic. You've probably seen a variation of it many times before. That distillation of, oh, here's the learning styles, visual, kinesthetic, and auditory, is a gross oversimplification of the original research around the ways in which we learn and the ways in which we're hardwired to learn. We are all, in some way, shape, or form, going to relate to these three ways of learning that I'm going to share with you, because most of us have, in some way, shape, or form, a mix of these three ways of learning in our charts. We tend to have a predominant way, and if your predominant way is left-brained, which is associated with the logical circuit, the chances that you're going to be successful in school and be able to learn in the way in which school presents information are going to be pretty high. So technically speaking, this is the way it's taught, but this isn't true. Technically speaking, half of us are left-brained, the other half are right-brained. In reality, about a third of us are left-brain dominant, but that doesn't mean you don't have other ways of learning woven into that. So let's be really, really clear about that. That doesn't mean you're only Spock and you just master data in a linear logical way and that's your only way of learning. It means that's your strongest way of learning, but it's not your only way of learning. And the thing that's important to remember is that if this is your only way of learning, it might not be your way of remembering, and it might not even be your way of focusing, which are actually a little bit different. So the left brain associated with the logical circuit, and you do have this one in your handout, the left brain is visual. It's all about patterns. And so it likes patterns and it likes to look for patterns and it understands patterns, which is why the left brain is really good at things like math and sequential thinking and logic. It learns through repetition. So if you teach a left brain dominant child the multiplication tables, they're going to learn it better if you do it over and over again. So how many of you have used flashcards, right? And you use the flashcards and you do them over and over and over again until the kid memorizes them. Well, that works great if you have a left brain dominant child. That doesn't work if you have a child that isn't left brain dominant necessarily. Left brain children, as I said, they sequence, they think in words. So when you give a left brain child, a left brain dominant child, the writing assignment of, you need to write an essay about the best parts of the summer, 3 paragraphs, what happened in the summer, what did you enjoy, right? A left brain dominant child is going to be able to go, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, and put those 3 paragraphs in a linear sequential order. And that's not going to be a huge challenge for them. That's going to be something that can come quite naturally. They think in words, they think in order. It's easy for them to spit that information back out. Left brain dominant children like math and facts. They might not like math, but they can do math and facts. And when they do math, and this is important because of the way math is taught in school, when they do math, they can prove through their work how they got to the answer that they got to. That's important because not everybody can prove how they got to the answer, but it doesn't mean that their answer is wrong. Important. In the way in which we've distilled this information down into a really simple formula, we say things like, you're either left brain dominant or right brain dominant, because the brain has 2 halves, so you can't be anything else other than that, right? But you can. The right brain dominant person is going to usually have, in some way, shape, or form, more definition, particularly in the head and the ajna. This is true for logic. If you have logic, this is usually about the head and the ajna. In the right brain, it's also head and ajna, and they're going to be more heavily defined towards the sensing circuit in the head and the ajna. So again, you have this in your slide handout. If you're trying to figure out in your chart, am I left or right brain dominant? Go back and look at the slide handout. Right brain dominant children typically don't always do poorly in school, but the way that the school system traditionally shares information isn't really ideal for the right brain dominant kid. Children who are right brain dominant tend to learn through the power of their imagination and storytelling. They are holistic thinkers, so they oftentimes will see the really big picture, but really sort of struggle to find the details and the little finite bits outside of the big picture. They're intuitive in the way in which they learn. They often are associated with with liking the arts, but I really want to be mindful when we say this, because sometimes we start to break this out because we love formulas so much, right? Because we're so deeply conditioned by logic in the school system. We're like, right brain dominant people are creative, artsy people, and left brain dominant people are scientists. I actually find that a lot of my clients um, who are right brain dominant are very scientific. They're possibility seekers. They see the big picture and they are exploratory. I find that many engineers, for example, are very right brain dominant, which surprises me. And interesting enough, I find this also surprising. I find that a lot of archetypes actually tend to be more left brain dominant than right brain dominant. And I would have thought that was flipped. But that's, and again, this is all totally anecdotal. I have zero statistics to back this up. So this is just stories from Karen's desk. Okay. But right brain dominant people tend to be at least classified as being more artistic. They have rhythm, but not rhythm in the way that left brain dominant people do. It's more rhythm around understanding the rhythm of the day and the rhythm of the flow of life. They react to nonverbal cues and clues. They react to feelings and visualization. They daydream. They think in pictures and images, not always sequentially, and they're emotional. And it doesn't mean that they are emotionally defined. It means that the emotional environment, and this is huge, you guys, the emotional environment for right brain dominant people has to feel loving and supportive. If you have a child that's in an environment that doesn't feel loving, and that can mean if they think the teacher doesn't like them, or if the classroom environment doesn't feel loving. So if they're being bullied, it doesn't only create trauma around being bullied, it actually shuts the brain's potential to learn down. And they can't learn in an emotionally stressed situation, which again, when we're translating this to our kids at home, and if some of you are doing that really delicate dance between, oh my gosh, I have to show up for my job and do my job, and maybe you're working from home and you have a kid or kids, and you're trying to balance homeschooling and you're stressed and they're stressed, that emotional environment for the right brain dominant child makes it very difficult for them to learn. And for you, obviously, as an adult, if this is your learning style or the one that you're most relate to, remember, I think we have all the learning styles in different ways. If your emotional environment is intense, you can't learn. It's very difficult to learn when you're right brain dominant and your emotional environment is intense. So you all have probably seen at various points along the way this graphic in different formats. You know, there are lots of different variations on this graphic, but this is the graphic that we use a lot about right brain and left brain dominance. And we think, oh, you know, there's two learning styles, right brain or left brain. I want to introduce you to another way of learning, another definition of learning and learning styles. When we look at right brain dominance, we see that it's sensing circuit. Left brain dominance is logical circuit. But what about individuality? What about people who carry individual definition? These are the kids that don't fit the mold. These are the kids that the teacher doesn't know what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing, that have their own path. The teacher oftentimes is trying to struggle to figure out what do I do to give this kid that it's going to interest them, or how this is going to work for them. This individual circuitry that has the role in the world of creating change. These are children who carry within them the code, and adults too. This is all of you guys, probably in some way, shape, or form. You carry within you, with individuality, the code that brings transformation and change to the world. So by nature, by definition, people who have a lot of individuality are here to be different. And we tend to classify that differentness as problematic because, again, this isn't about teachers, by the way. I'm definitely not slamming teachers. This is about the system. The system has a large group of people that you're ushering through it. And you don't have room in the system when your goal is to get them from September to May to deal with that one kid that doesn't fit in, that isn't following the protocol and isn't doing all those cool things that you thought you could give them to do that would entertain them to keep them busy so they wouldn't be doing something else that might be distracting or disrupting the class. Here are some, and this is, I say some because it's not inclusive, okay? This is just a loose summary. Sorry, I have to move my screen so I can see the rest of the slide. A loose summary of some of the traits of giftedness. Giftedness involves developmental differences in abstract reasoning, emotional sensitivity, and intensity. It's the experience, oftentimes, of feeling like an outsider. Can be observed in very young children, can be documented on measures of general intelligence, but oftentimes they have something about them that is not really fitting in with the standard metrics, right? Giftedness is lifelong. People who have a lot of mutative circuitry, they don't change that aspect of their personality over time. It creates qualitatively different life experiences. They have a different understanding of the world and they see it and feel it differently. It can lead to a set of issues unique to this group and makes them consequently vulnerable, oftentimes vulnerable to bullying and also feeling like they don't belong or fit in. So that causes them to lose their sense of lovability and their value. Indicates significantly different needs from the norm and requires early identification, intervention, and accommodations to assure healthy development. Now, I want to talk for just a second because when we talk about giftedness in children, what usually happens in the school system, because it just blows the system apart, right? When you get these little mutants in the school system, what we tend to think of as giftedness is, oh, he's really smart or she's really smart. So instead of putting them in a program that supports them in facilitating the growth of their unique gifts, we put them in a program that's academically accelerated. And we think, oh, that's giftedness. They're just more extra left brain dominant than the other people, right? That's not giftedness. That's not giftedness. And so I think it's important, especially when we are either serving as advocates, as parents, or we are advocating for ourselves in whatever way we learn, or we're healing our own wounds that maybe we've experienced in the school system. And we're trying to create an environment that really supports our children in becoming the full expression of who they really are in the world. We have to look at the definition of giftedness and what we can do to support children who experience or express giftedness in order for them to begin to cultivate these aspects of their personalities in such a way that they become genuine gifts that they can then give back to the world as those transformative global change agents that they are. By the way, I am not saying that left brain dominant and right brain dominant children are not gifted and individual circuitry is. I just think we need to reframe on this third learning style, because this is a learning style that in many, many cases really isn't getting their needs met in the school system at all. And these are the kids that we tend to start labeling with some kind of diagnosis. 11% of children in the United States, which is a lot of babies in this country, are diagnosed as having ADD, ADHD. And yet, when we look at post-mortem studies, we see that the changes that are consistent with a diagnosis of ADD are actually only present in about 0.01% in post-mortem studies, meaning we are somehow grossly overdiagnosing ADD in children. And my theory is, and again, no science on this is the world according to Karen, my theory is that these right brain dominant babies and these gifted babies who don't fit into, oh my gosh, I have 35 kids in my classroom and I've got to get them through the classroom and I got to make sure that some of them have food because so many of them are at food risk, and that they're safe because their home environments might not be safe or their parents are stressed. When the teachers are just trying to get the kids from point A to point B every year, they can't necessarily always be able to find strategies to really work with these kids. And so oftentimes the default becomes for us to diagnose somebody so that we can find sometimes medicinal ways to create alignment with a system where they don't really fit. I am not saying, let me be really clear as I say this, because I want to tread on this really carefully. I'm not saying that we shouldn't medicate some kids. I think actually that ADD medications for kids who genuinely need them are amazing. I actually have a lot of people who I think are genuinely ADD in my family, including my husband, who do take medications, and it's so good for them. It's so much better for their emotional well-being, their mental state of well-being, and their confidence. So I'm not poo-pooing medication. I am saying though that maybe we're over medicating. Maybe when we look at the numbers and we start to look at, we're trying to jam kids into a system that's not working, and then the way we get them to fit is to overstimulate their brain so they can't process sensory threshold anymore, so they stop being a problem in the classroom. That's a problem. And that's a problem that ultimately is not allowing us to support these children in cultivating their gifts and their strengths. And that creates trauma. Because basically, what we're saying to these kids is it's not okay for you to be who you are and how you are. You need to sit still and you need to focus on this stuff in front of you instead of thinking about how you're going to solve the world problems by inventing, a wastewater treatment facility that simultaneously allows you to use the water to grow new crops for people who don't have food, which is really what will come out of these kids who are gifted, these kids who are able to think about solutions from a unique and transformative perspective. If we shut that down, we miss the opportunity to tap into the elegant solutions that these young people are eventually going to be bringing onto the planet. Okay, opinionated lecture over. All right. So let's start looking at rethinking ADD and the idea of rethinking some elements of ADD through the lens of human design. So if you have never looked at the diagnostic criteria for ADD, I thought that I would put them up here for you because I have found, at least personally, and I'm pretty sure that I absolutely do not have ADD, that in spite of not having ADD, I still have a lot of the symptoms of ADD. Some of those symptoms are directly correlated to the symptoms of menopause, by the way, just in case you were wondering. A person with ADHD inattentive type has most of the following symptoms, excluding situations where the symptoms are better explained by either other psychiatric or medical conditions. And by the way, according to the DSM-R, you are not supposed to be able to diagnose a child with ADD until they are at least the age of 7. And yet, when we start to look at the numbers anymore, we have kids on ADD meds at 4 and 5 and 6. The brain is too immature to assess. I'm going to give you another really interesting statistic that breaks my heart. If you have a child who is on the younger end of the bell curve of age in their classroom, the youngest children in the class, those are like the April, May, June babies, July babies, August babies. The youngest kids in the class have a 60% higher chance of being diagnosed with ADD. Who knew that ADD was an age-related issue? But apparently it is. And the issue is really, these are kids that are going to be on the outer edges of the developmental spectrum in the classroom and consequently can't always adhere to some of the things that are happening in the classroom because they're not mature yet. And when the brain is not mature yet, particularly when it's really little, we can't diagnose ADD because the brain, all the parts of the brain haven't synced up yet. So people with ADD can be easily distracted, miss details, forget things, and frequently switch from one activity to another. They may have difficulty maintaining focus on one task. They become bored with a task after only a few minutes, unless they're doing something they find enjoyable. They have difficulty focusing attention on organizing or completing a task. They have trouble completing or turning in homework assignments, often losing things, like pencils, toys, assignments, or in my case, my keys or my cell phone, needed to complete tasks or activities, appear not to be listening when spoken to. They daydream, become easily confused, and move slowly. They have difficulty processing information as quickly and as accurately as others. They struggle to follow instructions. They may have trouble understanding details and overlooking details. So what we're going to do in this next section, oh, sorry, I'm not done. They can also, these are the adjunct symptoms here. So this is the major symptoms. These are the adjunct symptoms. They need to have this as well. Fidget or squirm a great deal. Talk nonstop. Dash around, touching or playing with anything and everything in sight. Have trouble sitting still during school, dinner, or while doing homework. Be constantly in motion. Have difficulty performing tasks or activities. They may be impatient. They may blurt out inappropriate comments, show their emotions without restraint, and act without regard to consequences. Have difficulty waiting for things they want or waiting their turn in line. And they often interrupt conversations or others' activities. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through not this particular secondary sheet, but I'm going to go through this first sheet, the major diagnostic criteria. And I'm going to point out where these might show up in a human design chart. And when I'm done going through all of these, I'm going to actually come out of the slides. I'm going to shift to a chart generation system, and I'm going to show you specifically on the chart where some of these things may be. So I just wanted to add this one at the beginning. So remember that on our second sheet, having difficulty waiting for things they want or waiting for their turn in line. I just want to throw this in here because part of why I laughed about this is because in my world, in Karen world, I tell people all the time, all 5 types, when I do a human design reading, you're here to wait. The manifester is here to wait for that inner alignment that comes when they get that, whatever that signal is in their own story, in their own inner hardwiring that tells them now is the time to initiate. The generators and the manifesting generators have to wait to respond. The projectors have to wait for that invitation and or recognition. And the reflectors have to wait out that full lunar cycle, right? Every single person who I explain to them, yeah, you need to wait. Waiting is what you need to do to get what you want. Every single person is like, what? I don't wait for anything. I always go do things. What if I get an idea and I just think it's time to go do it? What if spirit tells me I'm supposed to go do something? Everybody's got a question about how they want to dink with the whole waiting thing. We're all waiting on a certain level, and truly being able to wait is just as hard for kids as it is for us as grown-ups. So this is really, I think, more of an issue of impulse control rather than being able to wait. People who have an open throat may oftentimes have a difficult time in waiting because that impulse to act and that pressure oftentimes on the throat, which remember isn't just about the center for communication, it's the center for manifestation into action, right? Sometimes the open throat has difficulty waiting. Sometimes the open sacral, they get all this life force energy, right? And it's amplified and they don't know when enough is enough. They don't want to wait because they don't want it. It's been enough waiting, right? And of course, our manifesting generators and our manifestors who, thank you very much, we don't wait for anything. So this is, again, I'm just want to walk through this looking at this through the lens of human design, because I think that this will explain some of the things that we see in this diagnostic criteria. So let's break this down. We'll start with the main pieces. You ready? The first criteria says they are easily distracted, miss details, forget things, and frequently switch from one activity or another. Well, here we have, in terms of looking at this through the lens of human design, the possibility of these people who have these symptoms, having the hardwiring, having an open head and ajna. They may have the gate 41, the gate of imagination, defined. They may be manifesting generators who are by design designed to skip things, skip steps, right? They might be a 3rd or a 6th line profile who have to learn through experimental learning, experiential learning, or they may have the channel 6124 or the 4323, 2 channels that oftentimes indicate that you really need time to think and daydream as a way of integrating what you know. Okay, so again, bear with me. I'm going to go through all these and I'm going to show you where these are on the chart. Second criteria, have difficulty maintaining focus on one task. Again, the channel 6124 and the 2343, which needs time to think, not time to think in order to integrate. The gate 9 and the gate 52, which oftentimes present huge challenges in focus and learning. The 952 this channel is located on the top right hand side of the will center, pointing towards the sacral center.
Root center, pointing towards.
What did I say?
The will center.
Sorry, forgive me. The root center, pointing towards the sacral center. So this entire channel, which is a channel that is all about focus, has two complementary themes in each of these gates. And you really need to be able to draw on both of these energies in order to really achieve effective focus. Most people will pick that up in a classroom setting. Usually the collective aura of the classroom has both of these gates in it. But if you have definition in one of these gates and not the other one, if you have a hanging gate in this channel, it can create sometimes some interesting dilemmas around focus. So the gate 52 is kind of like the eagle. It gives you an eagle eye view of the whole big picture, right? Somebody with the gate 52 can see all the parts, all the potential parts, the way all the parts work together. They can get a really big eye, bird's eye view on what's going on. The gate 9 is really literally where the focus is. When the eagle, if you think about going back to the analogy of the eagle, when the eagle's flying over the field and it sees a rabbit, right? Starts to dive down and get the rabbit then jumps down the rabbit hole, right? The eagle can't catch the rabbit if it doesn't know where to focus its sight so that it can fly effectively down and grab the rabbit. The rabbit goes down the rabbit hole. The 9 by itself can tend to go deep, deep down into rabbit holes, focus. Sometimes we call this obsession, okay? The 9 can get really focused on a rabbit hole, but because they can't see the forest for the trees, they're so fixated on this tree, they don't understand where this is in the big picture. So sometimes somebody with a 9 really puts their focus deep, deep, deep into something that isn't relevant to the big picture. The 52 sees the big picture in such a big way, they don't know where to point their focus in order to land on the right spot to be effective. So both of those gates sometimes struggle with focus in different ways. The gate 41, which is the gate of imagination, which is also one of the places where daydreaming shows up in the chart because they're so imaginative. They're always thinking about the bigger, more beautiful, more interesting aspects of whatever it is the teacher is saying. The gate 36 is all about trying the next new thing. So people with the gate 36 are sometimes on to the next new thing before they're done with the one that they were doing. The gate 53 is the energy for starting things, but not always the energy for finishing things. So kids with this energy will often be really good at getting it started, but then not always so great at getting it finished. That's really problematic when it comes to turning in your homework on time, right? Manifesting generators, oi! I just did a podcast interview this morning with Tina Rusnak, and we were talking about, because she's also a manifesting generator, the judgment we get from not picking one thing and sticking with it. Manifesting generators are not supposed to pick one thing and stick with it. A 3rd or a 6th line profile is going to learn through experimentation and exploration. And of course, open-headed ajna, which is like 70% of us, sometimes have difficulty maintaining focus on one task. The next criteria, people with ADD become bored with the task only after a few minutes unless doing something they find enjoyable. I don't even know what to say about this one. Okay, so back to the gate 36, which can get bored. And when it gets bored, it goes off and does the next new thing. And all the generator types who are designed to respond to the things they love and not do the things they hate. Because when they're forced to do the things they hate, they cut themselves off from their inner authority and their life force energy, right? I'm not even going to go into that one. Have difficulty focusing attention on organizing or completing a task. Again, open head and ajna. Sensing circuit doesn't put things in order. They see the big picture. They're sensual. They see the story. They're holistic thinkers. And individual circuitry people, also, they don't put things in order. This whole idea of being organized and completing a task is a very left-brained criteria. The gate 53, as I said, is the gate of starting things. Somebody who has the gate 53 defined with the 42 open is going to have difficulty finishing what they started. And so we say, oh, well, you're not organized. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with organized. Maybe it has everything to do with they're not good at finishing things. People with the gate 42 and the 53 open. This is a root center energy, by the way, that comes from the left side of the root towards the sacral center. The gate 42 is not so great at starting things, but really good at finishing things. And so oftentimes these are the kids that are sitting and kind of going, what am I supposed to do again? What am I supposed to do again? Because they don't have the energy to get it started. Again, the channel 6124 and the 4323 have got this imagination, dreaming, thinking need. They need time to think, because if they can't think, they can't figure out what it is they're supposed to be doing and get organized. They need that integration piece that comes from thinking. The gate 52 and the gate 9, we just talked about that. That's the focus piece. The manifesting generators, again, is it really that they're not organized or focused, or is it really that a manifesting generator needs to do 3 or 4 things simultaneously, and probably 1, maybe 2 of those 4 things will actually bear fruit and the others will not? Because part of why the manifesting generator is doing what they're doing is because they need to burn off all the extra energy they have, so that extra doingness keeps them busy so they don't fry their thyroid, basically. And of course, a 3rd or a 6th line profile has to experiment and explore. Have trouble completing or turning in homework assignments, often loses things like pencils, toys, assignments, and needed to complete tasks or activities. Again, the gate 53 or the 42, difficulty starting, difficulty finishing, open head and ajna, and of course, our poor little manifesting generators. So you notice how many times they show up on the list? I want to say that when I used to coach people, parents of children who had ADD, I think I had one kid who was a manifester. I never had an ADD client who was a projector. Not saying that there aren't any, but I'm saying it wasn't the most typical. It was most typically generator types who were diagnosed with ADD, which I thought was really interesting, because in the beginning, when I first learned human design, I thought for sure it was going to be all the open sacral people amplifying all that energy and not being able to sit in the class. But it was actually the generators. And I think part of what sort of, this is again totally anecdotal, not scientific, but when I have 5 children, as you may know, 4 of my children are in their 20s. One is almost 30, which blows my mind. When I was homeschooling them, I homeschooled them for 11 years. When I homeschooled them in Texas, a couple of years that I was homeschooling in Texas decided that they would go to what they called the Back to Basics movement. This was kind of in the age of Reagan, I think. I'm really dating myself here, right? So during Reagan's administration, there was a whole Back to Basics movement in the government and in the education system. And so one of the things that they did was they amped up the amount of academic learning that was going to be happening in the classroom, and they eliminated recess. And when they eliminated recess, my kids and I would go to the park to play after we were done with our lessons for the day. And one of the parks that we played at was next to a schoolyard. And they literally were bringing these kids out and marching them around the play yard like they were prisoners in camp, right? So they were marching them around the play yard and then putting them back in the building. No play, just marching around the play yard. In the time that they started the Back to Basics movement in Texas, the diagnosis rate of ADD tripled. Now, they have since reinstated recess, which is in PE. But I think it's very interesting when you look at all these manifesting generators and generators who we know have to burn off the sacral energy, right? They got to burn it off. They're not burning it off, and they're just sitting there, and eventually that energy's got to go somewhere, right? And what's happening is these kids, they don't burn off the sacral energy. They don't get enough playtime. After school, they were going then to whatever their after school activity was, whatever the extracurricular activities were. Then they're coming home and they're eating dinner and sitting and doing homework. And then they can't sleep at night, right? They don't sleep at night. When you don't sleep at night, this is true for adults and children, when you don't sleep at night, it messes up your body's ability to produce serotonin. Serotonin is a chemical that is part of the chemical complex necessary in the brain for focus. So if you get chronically sleep deprived, you lose your ability to focus. We all know that, right? When you're really tired, you have to go have a cookie or a cup of coffee or something, right? Because you need to raise your serotonin level so that you can focus a little bit better. So what happens with these kids is if they don't get enough physical activity and they're trying to go to bed and they can't go to bed and they can't sleep, then their serotonin levels drop. Their ability to focus gets even worse. They start having problems not only with focus, but with emotional reactivity. Bedwetting, by the way, in older children is actually a symptom of low serotonin in children. In teenagers, what ends up happening is they get sleep deprived. Then they get out of school. And I don't know if you've ever lived next to a Starbucks next to a high school, but they like pour out, this was olden days, pre-COVID days, right? They pour out of the high school into the Starbucks and they're drinking all these super sugary, high caffeine drinks in the afternoon to prop themselves up, right? And then now they can't sleep because they're over sugared and they're over caffeinated, and it starts to happen. It just gets into a vicious cycle. So when I used to coach parents of children with ADD, one of the primary things we did is we explored sleep patterns in the family, and we got everybody to get on a good sleep pattern and a good exercise pattern so that all these kids could get their extra energy burned off and that everybody was sleeping better. And it was always interesting to me how after about 4 or 5 weeks of really good sleep, all the problems, all the challenges in the family started to go away. People started to get along better, the focus issues improved, the power struggles over homework started to disappear. It was like a whole new family emerged once everybody started to get good sleep. It seems so basic, right? Eat healthy food, don't drink a bunch of sugar and caffeine in the afternoon, get some exercise, and make sure you're in bed on time so that you get good quality sleep. Super important. I personally have some concerns about these kids being in front of the screens all day long, because what we also know is that when kids are in front of this blue light, and for some of you, you may also know that the EMFs, the electromagnetic frequencies from the screens, can disrupt the body's serotonin production and brain function, and it can make it difficult for kids to go to sleep at night. Kids especially, this is true for adults too though, we need to not be on screens at least 2 hours before bedtime because our bodies need that space to be able to sleep effectively and to get good high quality sleep. When we get good high quality sleep, we feel better, we function better, our anxiety levels go down, we're more creative, our serotonin levels go up, we feel happier. And certainly in a time when there's so much stress in our environment and in the world right now, it's so simple to think that, oh, maybe get off the computers a wee bit before bedtime and try to get some good sleep if you can, and maybe sprinkle in a little exercise if you need to, if you're a generator and you're not burning that energy off, so that you can sleep better and increase your serotonin levels and be more resilient and adaptable to whatever it is that's going on. Next one. Appear to not be listening when spoken to. Individual circuitry is internally focused. They have an internal auditory process. So any of you who are gifted by design, you process and learn from your internal reflection, from your integration, from all of that processing internally. When that's happening, you oftentimes can't hear, especially if you have the channel 4323, which we oftentimes refer to as the channel of not listening. And it's not that people who have this energy aren't listening, it's that they're thinking. So if you love somebody with this channel, which I'll show you in just a minute, and you're like, let's say they're your kid. This is my daughter. She has this in her sun and earth, right? Her conscious sun and earth. When you say their name and they're like checked out because they're thinking, and you're going, hey, 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 and they don't hear you, don't yell louder. Go up to them and touch them gently on the shoulder and get their attention. They're not ignoring you. They're processing on the internal plane. The sensing circuit also can't listen when spoken to, especially if somebody's yelling at them, because remember, in the sensing circuit, if the emotional energy is uncomfortable, and this is true whether it's defined or open, this isn't about open centers, it's about the circuit. People with the circuit are very dialed in to emotional energy. And if the emotional environment is, if somebody's yelling at you, hey, you can't hear because you start to shut down. And of course, let's not forget the projection field of the fifth line, which can be probably also part of any of this if the teacher themselves has got unresolved issues around focus and attention or being or feeling heard, because then that gets thrown into the projection field and we think somebody's not listening, but in truth, the issue is you don't feel heard. And that's a subtle difference, but an important one. The next one, they daydream, become easily confused, and move slowly. Again, that's the gate 41 or the 61, the sensing circuit. Emotional learning, again, remember when the emotional environment isn't supportive, people who have a lot of sensing circuit or who have emotional definition sometimes become confused and they move slowly because they're afraid. Their learning has shut down. Defined root, if you have a defined root, it has pulses and it pulses on or pulses off. And sometimes when it's not on, there's nothing you can do to get the energy moving. So of course you're moving slowly. And the open sacral, when it gets overstimulated, can become confused and shut down. It's too much energy and it's hard to process and think and learn when it's overstimulated. Has difficulty processing information as quickly and as accurately as others. You know, I just want to throw in here as I say this, accurately is the sort of the buzzword here for the third and the sixth line profiles. Remember, if you are a third or a sixth line profile, you are designed to learn through experimenting and exploration. You are an experiential learner, which means you're not always going to get it right the first time, and that's an important part of your learning process. Emotional authority, again, requires that you have that time for the emotional alignment to happen. And here's what that means. You have an defined emotional solar plexus. You have emotional waves and energy. When you learn something, so let's say you have emotional authority and you're listening to me today. When you learn something, you're not actually going to integrate it into your understanding until you are back at the same point on your wave again. So you have to go through your whole emotional cycle before you go, oh, now I get it. This happens to me a lot when I teach human design. I'll have people who have emotional authority and they'll take all 4 levels, right? And then they'll disappear for like 8 months. And then they'll come back and they'll be like, I'm back. And part of what's happened is they've had to go through their whole wave with the information before it all integrates. Same is true, by the way, for the integration circuit, which I'll show you in just a minute. And of course, as always, the big culprit here, the open head and open ajna. They struggle to follow instructions. That's the sensing circuit because they don't think linearly. The individual circuit because they know stuff. And they don't know how they know that they know, but they know. So why do they have to follow the instructions if they already know it? The third and the sixth line profile has to explore and experiment with it. So it looks like they're not following the instructions, but they are in fact following the instructions. They're just figuring out what's the best way to do it. The manifestors aren't designed to follow instructions. Thank you very much. They have their own inner authority. The generators and the manifesting generators are designed to respond, not to follow. The projectors are sitting there going, these are the instructions. Don't they understand? There's like a much better way that we could be doing this. And the reflectors are going, hey, let's just all be one and come together in this giant conglomerate of what's happening here. And oh my God, nobody's feeling these instructions. So I'm not going to do it either. Nobody's designed to follow instructions. We are designed to cooperate and engage in the learning process correctly according to our own unique design. Has trouble understanding details and overlooking details. That's the sensing circuit, individual circuitry, manifesting generators. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second because I'm going to open up a different screen for you guys just because I know that not everybody has all of this information on recall. So I just want to highlight for you some of the things that I've been talking about. So you may have heard me talk about the 61, this 24, the 43, and the 23. So these are the channels most often associated with the need to think as part of the integration process. You all know where emotional authority is. The gate 36, which we talked about, is a place where oftentimes people get bored, and when they get bored, they want to go explore the next new thing. The gate 41 is the gate of daydreaming. That's also sometimes associated with ADD, also associated with extreme creativity. The 52, which has the big picture perspective on focus, and the 9, which has the eye for going deep down the rabbit hole, where to put your focus. 53 is the gate of starting things. 42 brings us the energy for completion. The integration circuit are these channels here. So if you have any of these channels, it means you need time to integrate and to learn. If you have an emotional solar plexus that is defined, you need to go through your whole wave as part of the learning process. Cindy, do you think there's anything else I forgot in this showing people where things are?
And the 2551, so that because the centering would also, and anything going up the middle.
Well, yes, but yeah, but that's in the gifted, if you go back to individuality, giftedness, that's all of the individual circuitry. So do go back and look at the chart
That you
on
have
the
in the
slide,
slide.
on the slides handouts.
But no,
As I started doing all this, I ended up with like another 80 slides and I thought, I can't do this to people today.
no, I think that covers everything that you were doing in the DSMR.
Yeah, and of course, under normal, if the when the head and the ajna are white, and they can have gates on it, but if they're white, these two centers, that's the open head and ajna, and again, that's 70% of us. Then there's that whole not being able to retain information piece that we talk about.
And all those manifesting generators.
And all those manifesting generators. So I just want to just go through a couple of really quick things to finish up here. You may have heard the 7 intelligences. This is a brand new twist that we've had on the educational formula in the last decade or so. This is based on the work of Howard Gardner, and there's been this whole new idea that, well, kids have 7 different intelligences. The 7 different intelligences are linguistic intelligence, which is the ability to use words and language, and sensitivity to sounds, meanings, and the rhythms of words. Logical mathematical intelligence, or logical intelligence, is the ability to think conceptually and the capacity to discern logical and numerical patterns. Kinesthetic intelligence is the ability to control body movements and handle objects skillfully. Spatial intelligence is the capacity to think in images and pictures and to visualize accurately and abstractly. Musical intelligence is pretty obvious. Interpersonal intelligence is the capacity to detect and respond appropriately to the moods and motivations and desires of others. Intrapersonal intelligence is the capacity to be self-aware and in tune with inner feelings. Now, Howard Gardner, and this is important to know, when Howard Gardner first came up with it, and this is research he did in the 1960s, but it's become really trendy in school lately. When he first did his research on multiple intelligences, he had over 100 intelligences, and people told him, there's just no way, there's no way we're going to be able to implement that into the school system. So recently, in the last few years, he has begged people, please, can we add at least these last 2? So the 8th one is naturalistic intelligence. It's the ability to recognize and categorize plants, animals, and other objects in nature. And existential intelligence, sensitivity, and the capacity to tackle deep questions about human existence, such as what is the meaning of life, why do we die, and how did we get here? So again, remember, there are a lot of educational researchers out there who know that we can't just have 1, 2, or maybe 3 ways of learning, and we can't just have 7 intelligences. We are much more complex than that. And I do believe that understanding your child's human design is a really, really important thing to helping your child learn. The bottom line here on this is that you're intelligent. No matter what you learned, no matter what somebody told you, no matter what you've been diagnosed with, you are intelligent. You have your own intelligence and your own unique capacity to learn in the way that's right for you. And if anyone's ever told you that you're not brilliant, they were wrong. Okay? They just didn't know how to see it. And I'm hoping that as we went through some of this today, that you got some new insights into how you are smart and how you are brilliant. I want to end with just some little quick hacks, and these are not by any means inclusive, things you can do to enhance your child's ways of learning if you are at home distance learning with your kid. First of all, know yourself and know your student. Remember that your human design impacts your child's human design. And I might also add with that, know your own attachments to the outcome. Some of us have a lot of deep parental attachments to our children doing well in school because it becomes a marker of how well we're doing, or it becomes a marker of the hope that, oh my God, my kid is going to grow up and be okay. When we can let go of attachments and we start to see our children for who they are instead of being attached to, oh my God, or what grade are they making? That space that gets created creates a lot more room for that child to step into their gifts. Create a safe emotional environment, which means if you're losing it because of whatever's going on around you, don't try to homeschool during that time. Your kids are going to learn, and they're going to learn even if we have 2 or 3 years of wonky schooling, they're going to be able to catch up. The brain is highly malleable. Your children are brilliant. You're brilliant. Everyone's going to catch up. So don't let these storylines around. There's going to be this giant gap and we're all going to be not brilliant is not true. The kids will catch up. You know, I homeschooled my kids and all of my kids learned to read on their own time frame. My oldest son learned to read, taught himself to read with assistance, obviously, when he was 9. He went from not reading to reading The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings within 3 weeks. Okay, your kids will catch up. Teach them in multiple ways. If they're not learning the way that the teacher is teaching it, and especially over Zoom, and my God, some of these teachers are having to do double curriculum. They're teaching in small live circumstances, and then they're doing online lessons as well. And it's just difficult sometimes to translate the material over Zoom or whatever format your kids are stuck in. So don't be afraid to stray wildly from the curriculum and find the way that best supports your child. Again, the assessments and all those pieces will fall into place eventually. Focus on the O. This is a concept that comes from Rudolf Dreikurs, who was a child development specialist and an educational psychologist in the 1950s and 60s. He was a contemporary of Maria Montessori. He had a lot of conversations with teachers about encouragement and teaching children to really grow around the areas in their life that are working. And he had one day he was doing a walkthrough in a school with some teachers after school, and there was a teacher sitting there working on grading the papers of her students, and she looked up at Dr. Dreikurs and she said, what if there's just nothing about this child that's good? And Dr. Dreikurs took the paper out of her hands and he looked at the paper she was grading very careful, and he said, right there on this page is a perfect O. Always find the O and focus on what your child is getting right, because that creates not only a safe emotional environment, but it also allows them to move their focus into expanding in a way that feels good and gives them confidence. Minimize screen time and maximize outdoor time. These kids are sitting in front of these screens for 6 hours, sometimes even more. My daughter sits in front of a screen and then she goes to 2.5 hours of Hebrew twice a week, which I've put the kibosh on. Because we have lots of scientific data now that shows when kids are sitting in front of a screen, it changes the way their brain functions. And it makes it more difficult for them to learn. So don't be afraid to say, we're having tech difficulties today, and go turn it off and go outside. They'll learn more integrating outside than they will sticking their nose in front of the screen. Make sure you create enough time for them to move and groove the body. They need to move, and a lot of kids need to move to integrate information, especially our generator types. Have a lot of art supplies available if they get stuck or jammed up, especially when they're like really trying to work on math. Take a break and go do an art project instead. Keep index cards and post-it notes handy, especially for your right brain dominant children. That way, if they're trying to organize whatever their thoughts are, they can write all their thoughts out on index cards, and then they can shift them and move them around until they get the order that they want them in. Because remember, sequencing is hard for your right brain dominant children. For right brain dominant children as well, remember the sensing circuit is over on the solar plexus, is not associated with the timing of the spleen. So people who are right brain dominant need to not be operating under time pressure, because time pressure stops the learning process. So eliminate time and timing and pressure around timing. You have a lot of plants and animals in the environment, if you can, animals in the environment where your kids are learning. That energy of the plants, there's a lot of research that shows that when kids are around plants, it actually changes their energy and their focus. Kids who have pets can also manage the emotional intensity by hanging out with the dog or the cat for a while. Trust your child's direction and follow it. If your child's showing interest in something, let your child pursue that instead. Last year, we were looking at the end of the year when we were homeschooling last year, the block for the unit was Greek mythology. And my daughter, who's 11, is a radical feminist. And so we very quickly ditched Homer and studied women in ancient Greece, which there weren't that many, but we did. Feed your children good, healthy food because it helps them sustain their learning, especially make sure they get good essential fatty acids. Seek support if you need it. Know where your child is developmentally. Give your child more time to play than you think they need, because they need a lot of it. Craft agreements together with your child so that you can get them to agree to things according to their strategy. If they have the gate 5, they need rhythm and consistency. If they have the gate 15 and or emotional authority, they need to follow the flow. Mistaken motivations. I'm going to do another show on mistaken motivations because it's a topic that's kind of come up lately, but basically every energy type has energy needs. Know how to help your kids get their energy needs met. All right, I know I'm running over. This is a topic I get super excited about. So just a quick reminder, registration for the International Human Design Conference is still open and we still have some seats, but we're running out of seats. So if you want to be at this conference, September 11th, 12th, 13th, online. And by the way, if you don't want to attend online, because I just told you guys don't sit in front of your computer all day, all of these events, all of these presentations are going to be recorded. So you can come back and access the recordings later. Registration is now open and you still can get a position in our vendor hall. Go check it out if you haven't. We've got some amazing, amazing women leaders in human design presenting. I can't tell you, I've had the privilege of interviewing them in podcasts recently, and it's just mind-blowing how incredibly excellent and committed and dedicated they are to your personal growth and evolution. Okay, I'm done, Cindy.
Yes, there were some questions that came up, but we kind of went over. So I want one. Are you saying one question are you saying that both the open head and ajna or either could be that way? You have to have them both.
If you have an open ajna, you're always going to have an open head. So either, yes.
People were relating to it. I saw Corinne on Facebook had a question. I have the 5710, which is part of the integration circuit, so I need time to integrate, but I'm a splenic projector, which seems pretty quick. Can you give some examples of when either one would apply to a situation?
So the splenic pulse is going to tell you what you need to do in the moment. But the learning piece with the 5710 means that you might have an understanding in the moment, you have knowingness, but you need time to really integrate that knowingness to be able to explain it to somebody else.
So I know that you've often said that we all have all the chart, but these markers that you went through, these are usually where we have definition. Judy's
Yes.
asking also, are these gates opened or defined?
Yeah, I find that this is usually when they're defined. That doesn't mean you're not going to have it, especially if you have it in your conditioning field, but I do find it's more when it's defined.
Destiny asked, does the distraction aspect of the gate 56 play into this as well?
I mean, I would say the 56 is always crafting a story and looking at the metaphor, and certainly the sensing circuit with all of its ability to be imaginative and creative and holistic, it can be a big challenge with that as well. And I don't want to call it a challenge. I don't even like to refer to it as a challenge. It's a different way of experiencing and processing information in the world. So let's stop calling it challenge and problem. The only problem is when you try to squish it into the left brain dominant school system. That's really the only problem. The kids don't have a problem. It's the system that's not working.
Yes, this is recorded, and the recording will be posted on Facebook and also on our blog, at least by tomorrow morning. I have to say I had an aha. I had to go look at it. But growing up, we'd always be sitting there, mom, mother, hey, Ruthie. And I finally figured out she has the 4323.
Of course, totally.
I was like, oh, aha.
Absolutely. So, just real quick, I do find that there's a relationship between the gate 64 and dyslexia and the gate 22, because dyslexia, I find it's a very sensing circuit issue, and it tends to be in the ability to translate the visual images into language. And that's the correlation I see, definitely not causation. So that would be part of what I might throw in there, Tyre. All right, thank you all again for joining me. I hope I gave you at least some insights on some of the questions. I want you all please to walk away from today remembering how brilliant you are. I will be taking a bit of a break here because we have conference coming up, and then following that, I will be speaking on the TEDx stage in Colorado Springs, which is not really a stage, it's a sound stage. So I won't be on stage, I will be in a sound stage. Talking about the relationship between trauma and burnout. So I don't think I'm back until the end of September, maybe October. So I'll miss you guys. And when I come back, we're going to be exploring mistaken motivations and energy needs because, as I said, that's something you guys have been asking about a lot. So, yeah, go outside and play. Go, Rebecca, go play. And I'll talk to you later. Thank you, Cindy, as always. Be well.